The Fox Spirit, A Forbidden Love. Part 3 of 3. I am a fox spirit, an immortal creature bound to the shadows of the world. For 1,000 years I wandered alone, watching the lives of humans from afar, never able to be a part of their world. That was, until I met him, the man who, without knowing it, awoke something inside me that I had long buried. We shared moments that I had never dared to dream of. I watched him, spoke with him, and eventually I loved him. But I could never reveal my true self, knowing that my nature would destroy the bond we had formed. Still, the pull was too strong, and one night, I gave in. We kissed, and for the briefest moment my illusion faltered. He saw the fox spirit beneath the woman I pretended to be. His eyes widened in disbelief, and in a panic, I ran. I couldn't return to him, not after that. Knowing I could never give him the life a human woman could, I kept my distance. But even though I stayed away, I could never stop loving him. I watched from afar as his life unfolded, always out of reach, my heart aching for the connection we had once shared. From the safety of the trees, I kept my distance, hidden from his world, but always close enough to see him. I watched as he returned to the riverbank where we had once met, his eyes searching the shadows, his expression heavy with longing and confusion. He didn't understand why I had left, why I had run, and every time I saw him return to that place, my heart ached with the weight of what could never be. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to step out of the shadows, to explain, to tell him that I had loved him more than I had ever thought possible, but I couldn't. I knew that if I did, it would only bring more pain. He could never be with me. Not truly. I wasn't like the women of his world, the ones who could love him freely, giving him the life he deserved. So, I stayed silent, watching him from afar, my heart breaking with each passing day. At first he came often, his visits to our place frequent and filled with hope. I could see it in his eyes, the quiet longing, the way he searched the trees, the way his voice sometimes called out into the empty night, as if hoping I would answer. And each time he came, my heart broke a little more, knowing I could never go to him, knowing that the life he wanted, the life I wanted, was forever out of reach. Time moved on, as it always does, and slowly his visits grew less frequent. He still came, but with each passing month, the hope in his eyes began to fade. The riverbank, once the place of our sweetest moments, became just another part of his past, a memory he visited less and less. I watched as his life unfolded without me, as he returned to the world of humans and built the life I could never give him. He was successful, as I had always known he would be. His name spread throughout the village and beyond, his scholarship admired, his wisdom sought after by many. I watched as people gathered around him, their admiration clear in the way they spoke his name, the way they looked to him for guidance. And then, one day, I saw her. A woman. Human, warm, kind. She wasn't like me. There were no secrets in her, no illusions to hide behind. She was everything I could never be for him. She loved him openly, freely, without the fear of being seen for what she truly was. I watched as their relationship blossomed, as the bond between them grew, and with each passing day, the ache in my heart deepened. She gave him the life I never could. She gave him warmth, love, and a family. I watched from the shadows as they walked together, hand in hand, their voices filled with laughter and joy. I saw the way he looked at her, the way his eyes softened when she spoke, and I knew. He was happy. It was what I had always wanted for him, wasn't it? For him to find peace, to find someone who could give him the life he deserved. And yet, even as I told myself that, the pain in my chest only grew, a hollow ache that seemed to deepen with every glimpse of the life he had built without me. They had children. 2, a boy and a girl. I watched as they grew, as he taught them the things he had once told me about, history, art, the beauty of the world. I saw the pride in his eyes as his children thrived, their laughter filling the air in a way that made my heart twist with both joy and sorrow. They were his world now, his family, his life. And I was just a memory, a fleeting dream that had long since faded. He came to the riverbank less and less, his visits growing rare until they eventually stopped altogether. The place that had once been ours, the place where we had shared our sweetest moments, was no longer a part of his life. It was no longer needed. He had moved on, as humans always do, his life filled with the warmth of those who could love him the way I never could. But I stayed. Even though he no longer came, I remained in the shadows, watching from afar, my heart still tethered to him by the invisible thread that had bound us from the beginning. I told myself that it was enough to see him happy, enough to know that he had found the peace I could never give him. But the loneliness inside me only grew, the ache of unspoken love, a constant presence that gnawed at my soul. I had lived for 1,000 years, drifting through the world as a creature of shadows, but nothing had ever felt as painful as watching him from afar, knowing that I could never be a part of his life. Time passed, as it always does, and though I told myself that I should leave, that I should let him go, I couldn't. I couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop loving him, even from a distance. He was the first man I had ever allowed myself to love, the first human who had ever seen me, even if only for a brief, fleeting moment. I watched as his life unfolded, as he grew older, his children thriving, his wife by his side. I saw the lines begin to form on his face, the silver creeping into his hair, and still my heart ached for the life we might have had, if only things had been different. But I knew that I had no place in that life. I was a fox spirit, bound to the shadows, forever watching from afar. And he had found the life he was meant to live. The years had passed, and now it was the end. He had grown old, his body fragile and weary from the weight of time. His children, the ones I had watched grow up from the shadows, had long since gone, living lives of their own, far from this quiet place. His wife, the woman who had given him the warmth and love I never could, had passed away a few years ago. Now, he was alone. I had known this day would come. I had watched him live his life, year after year, as time slowly took its toll on him. And though I had told myself that I should leave, that I should let him go, I never could. I stayed, always watching from afar, even as his visits to the river stopped, even as his life changed and moved on without me. And now it was his last day. I could feel it in the air, a stillness that settled over the world, as though everything had paused, waiting for the inevitable. From the edge of the forest, hidden among the trees, I watched his home, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what was coming. The house was quiet, the only light coming from the flicker of a lantern in the window. He was lying in his bed, his breath slow and shallow, his once strong frame now frail and tired. The scholars no longer visited him, the house once filled with the sound of voices now eerily silent. The sight of him so alone on the final night of his life broke something deep inside me. For 1,000 years I had wandered through this world, untouched by the passage of time. I had lived a life without connections, without the warmth of human companionship, and yet he had been the one exception. The one man who had made me feel alive again, even if only for a brief moment. I couldn't bear the thought of him dying alone. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to step inside his home, to sit by his side, to hold his hand, and let him know that he wasn't alone. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't be the one to say goodbye. I couldn't risk breaking the fragile boundary that had always separated us. But still, I couldn't leave him. Not tonight. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I stepped out from the woods, the cool night air brushing against my fur as I transformed into my human form. My 9 tails disappeared, my sharp features softening into the delicate face he had once known. My hair flowed like silk down my back, and I felt the familiar weight of my robe against my skin as I crossed the field to his home. I stopped just outside where the light from the lantern spilled across the ground, casting long shadows. For a moment I simply stood there, watching, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing down on me. And then I began to dance. Slowly at first, my movements gentle, tentative, as though testing the ground beneath me. But with each step, each turn, I poured more of myself into the dance, everything I had never been able to say, everything I had felt, but had always kept hidden. The love I had carried for him for so long, the pain of knowing I could never be a part of his world, the sorrow of watching him grow old while I remained the same. I let it all flow through me, my body moving with the grace of 1,000 years of silence. The night wrapped around me as I danced, the stars above watching in quiet reverence. Each movement was an expression of the love I had never spoken aloud, the bond we had shared, even though he hadn't known it. With every step, I let the feelings I had buried for so long rise to the surface, unrestrained, unguarded. It was as if I was saying goodbye, not just to him, but to the life I had never been able to share with him. When the dance finally came to an end, I stopped, my chest heaving with the weight of the emotions I had unleashed. For a moment I stood there, my head bowed, the silence of the night pressing in on me. I looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, his frail body outlined by the soft glow of the lantern behind him. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but there was a smile on his lips, a soft, knowing smile, as though he had been waiting for this moment, as though he had always known I would come back, even if it was just for this one final night. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other, the distance between us no longer filled with the unspoken questions, the longing. There was only understanding now, quiet, wordless understanding. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His smile said it all, the gentle curve of his lips like a whispered thank you for the time we had shared, for the love I had never been able to express. It was as if he had been waiting for this, for me, to return one last time. And then, as quietly as he had come, he turned and slipped back into the shadows of his home. I watched him disappear inside, my heart heavy with the weight of 1,000 unsaid words, 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. I wanted to follow him, to be with him in his final moments. But I couldn't. I knew that this was how it had to be. This was the ending that had been written for us from the very beginning. So I stayed outside, close to his home, as the night slowly faded into dawn. I stayed, listening to the soft rise and fall of his breath, waiting, knowing that soon it would stop. And then, as the first light of the sun began to creep over the horizon, I felt it. His spirit left. I felt it in the air, the soft, gentle passing of a life well lived, a soul at peace. The house fell silent, the world holding its breath in reverence for the man who had once been everything to me. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I turned away, my heart heavy, my feet light as I ran back into the woods, back to the shadows where I belonged. That's all for tonight. If you enjoy my bedtime stories, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for joining me tonight.